process for the Vanduul was basically started with Chris Roberts and David Haddock coming up with basically the story about the character and the fiction and like who they are, who the race is, and what do they do, and how, as the player or humans, we interact with them and how we're going to come across them. And then, as art director, I got involved to try to decide, okay, how is this going to look, you know? And in the beginning, Chris always had sort of an idea to pay homage to the Kilrathi from the Wing Commander series. So there was always that in the back of my mind as I started kind of roughing some very quick sketches out, also doing some rough sculptures in Mudbox. So the feline aspect was always there in the back of my mind. Okay, you know, make it feline, but he said he wanted it definitely meaner and sleeker, not as hairy, more alien-esque. So that sort of evolved a little bit, going back and forth just between Chris and I. I know David was involved a little bit as far as seeing something that inspired him to possibly start to change the fiction, or something that Chris and I liked. You know, David would sort of go off on a tangent of, oh, well, this element that, you know, we came up with looks pretty cool. Maybe that can be for this, and then that would in turn come back and inspire the design. So it was a really interesting collaborative process. So it got to the point to where it was always going to be an 8-foot tall creature. I think everybody's happy with that. So we did some tests as far as like showing the work in progress of the creature. And then, you know, it always starts with the head, but it sort of goes down to the body. So I think we got the head where we wanted it. It went, you know, kind of feline. It went sort of fish-like at one point. You know, a lot of it is trying to figure out what Chris just doesn't like. So as we worked down the body, Chris wanted to make sure that it didn't have just a person in a suit feel. So we took the 5 fingers away, went to 3 long claws. We thinned him up, made him very sleek. The legs are very thin and actually have some openings in them, both in the arms and the legs, to show that it's very unhuman, and definitely a person can't be inside there. And we made the walking motion in the feet a thing called digitigrade, which is basically walking on the toes like an animal, sort of semi that way. So the foot is not really long, but it is definitely up above and it's not on the ground. So that sort of, once we do things like that, then we have to figure out, okay, let's do some range of motion sort of tests. And since we have a lot of these exoskeleton pieces coming off of him that we all liked, with some shoulder blades and these tubes and horns and stuff, we had to quickly see if they were going to work with all the things that this character is going to do in the game, you know, with fighting and shooting and flying ships, sitting. You know, I originally had spines coming off the hips, which looked really cool and gave a nice balance, but Chris felt that he would be hurting himself constantly, so off they came. And then, so we do some walking tests and some animation movement. Very quickly, I'll rig that up myself before it goes to our animation department. So there won't be a lot of back and forth to make sure everything is working properly and it looks anatomically feasible. And as that's happening, we're sort of finalizing the finished material and the look of the skin, and the paint job on the head and everything, whether it has any hair or fur. And I think we ended up having a little bit of chest hair on the front. We have to be careful not to make it look like some weird macho, you know, Tom Selleck. But I think so far it doesn't. But that'll have to be tweaked once we get into the game engine, and then we can sort of further tweak that to see how the hair reacts in that. Before it goes into the game engine, we're designing costumes and uniforms right now. Another freelance artist is taking care of that. So we have to figure out sort of the military feel and look of these races and these characters, both in civilian type clothing, military type clothing, and within the military, you know, whether they're in space and they need, you know, special, you know, apparatuses beyond sort of their own evolved body, which has sort of adapted itself over many years of not sort of being on their home world to live in space and to travel great distances in space, as well as sort of being on different planets, environments. So they have, I think, a pretty wide range of breathing different atmospheres, wherever they go. So I think they're ready for any of that stuff. So in addition to their own evolved body, we have to think about that when we're designing the uniforms and the clothing and how they all, mix together without getting too bulky because they're a giant creature. So we're exploring different things right now. It's in kind of an early stage, but it's cool. It'll go sort of like with what we're all thinking the style philosophy of the Vanduul would be. Very spiny, very dangerous looking, dark, hard metals, some interesting sort of tribal shapes. Definitely they have a primitive feel to them, so we don't want to go anything too slick looking, So yeah, should be good.